So we're going to get started because there's a lot to cover here. We want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions at the end. My name's Shannon Darrough. Is that not loud enough? Yeah. I'm about as close as I want to get to this thing. Yeah. So, Loic, you're president. What should I do here? Okay. But I'll start just so that we can get through our stuff. My name's Shannon. I'm the director of digital media at MoMA. If you had the printed program, you would have only seen my name on it. That's my fault, because you're actually lucky because there are two other people presenting. I'm not going to present about the Met's redesign nor the Whitney's redesign. People from the Met and the Whitney will present on that. So we have Liz Filardi, who is the senior product manager, a title that changed yesterday. And then Sofie Andersen, who is the director of digital media at the Whitney. So we're here to talk about redesigns. And redesigns are big deals. First, there's the sheer scale of the tech and the design involved. For the three of us, our sites are the biggest, most complicated, most trafficked products that we oversee. That's an assumption, but I think it was a good assumption. And delivering a redesign with a great UX that works in harmony with all your other museum experiences, that's on budget and on time, that sets you up for a happy life ever after is really hard to do. And that's just the design and implementation. If only redesigns were just about design and implementation. There's obviously so much more to that. There's the research, the planning, the politics, the communication, inclusiveness, exclusiveness, I think is important, governance, hand-holding, tears of joy and of pain, the meetings and the meetings that follow those and the meetings that precede those. I mean, it's just like ridiculous. So this talk came about because one thing I found really useful and kind of comforting was talking to my colleagues in other institutions about what they were doing, and not the three bullet-pointed best practices, not the epiphanies, not like what worked perfectly, but the things that didn't work well, and even just a description of how they were doing things, because it was nice to see these processes, or interesting to see these processes, and there's some alignment and some very different ways of doing things. We're at three very different points in the process. We're at MoMA redesigning our site right now. So that's pretty raw perspective I have to share. The Met recently unveiled their new brand, which included a redesigned website. So that's a pretty fresh perspective that Liz will share. And the Whitney redesigned their site a few years ago, and Sofie is going to go over its legacy. And I'd say the legacy is one of the most important parts of the redesign, because whether it sets you up for success, whether it's something easy to manage, all those things are super important and should be thought about when you're redesigning your site. So we're going to go through each of our experiences quickly. This is going to be more about the how than the what. There's a ton of stuff to cover, so we're not going to go into great deal. We're talking about three big projects here in an hour, and we're going to try to carve out some time at the end of the talk so that you guys can ask some questions. So I'm just going to jump in. So as I mentioned, we're currently redesigning our website. We started pushing changes in July of last year. We've been working for about a year and a half. This is our new homepage and global navigation that launched 8 days ago. This is the homepage that preceded it. Quick background, we have about 26 million visitors to MoMA.org and the store combined. Been around for over 20 years, MoMA.org. Got a big online collection, not as big as the Met's. Last redesign was in 2009. This one is a full stack redesign, so we're talking all the way from the nether regions of the back end to the very tip of the visual design, so the whole thing, which is brutal. There were quite a few objectives. I'm just going to go over a few of them. We had a huge amount of technical debt to address. We're talking sovereign level technical debt. We had a massive website that was on Rails 2. We want to move to Rails 4, or we're moving to Rails 4. That jump is not something, that's just not a minor rewrite. That's a full rewrite of everything. tons of dependencies, like replacing the calendar means dealing with the app's dependency, our mobile site's dependency, our lobby screen's dependency on the calendar. So it's like it's like a house of cards. Of course, we want to do a responsive website. Everybody wants to do that now. We redesigned in 2009. 2007 was the iPhone. Who would have thought? Yada, yada, yada. About 40% of our traffic is mobile. So before we did the slide before that, 40% of our traffic actually got an abbreviated content experience. So now 100% of our traffic gets all the content that we have to offer. We wanted to take as much as we could in-house. A lot of that is about the collection. I'm looking at Gavin here. CogApp used to do our collection. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about them, but we wanted to take it in-house so that we would have complete control over it and we could, love it and massage it all we wanted to. Also, we wanted user-centered, this to be a user-centered initiative. That's, of course, something you all take for granted. Last redesign was much more organization-centered, and I think everybody's last redesign was probably organization-centered, and now, we're moving ahead. So quickly, I'm going to describe our team because your design and tech capacity is going to dictate how you're going to want to approach this project or a project like this. It's going to determine what you can build, and I think even more importantly, what you can maintain afterwards. So we're talking about sustainability and then innovation too, about what you're able to iterate on. So our department, digital media, we're responsible for most of the public-facing tech. I'm speaking really quickly because I'm trying to get through this really quickly, by the way. So if you need me to slow down, just ask me. But we do most of the public-facing tech in the museum. So that's the website, the app, lobby screens, some of the in-gallery interactives. So that's a pretty big footprint. There are 10 of us. I'm the director. The assistant director is here with us today. Maybe she is watching. That's good, that's good. We've got 4 devs, 2 designers, a video producer, and a product manager. So, that's a robust team, but a small team, when you consider all that we have going on. Okay, so of course, it's not just our team that is running this project. There are a lot of participants, and this is, these projects are about communication, about hand-holding, about getting your organization ready for change. It's about getting help when needed and minimizing the help that's not needed. I think that's a big part of it too. So yeah. So there are 3 legs to this stool, to this project. The core team is digital media. We handle the design and the build. Sorry. This is our life. So, we kind of live this project. So we have weekly IPMs, iteration planning meetings, daily stand-ups, monthly or weekly product and design reviews, monthly retrospectives, dev retrospectives separately. They call it the real retrospectives. Inceptions at the beginning of every stage of this project so that there's a shared a shared understanding of what we're going to build. So, there's quite a bit of overhead there, but I think it's worth it. It's definitely gets everybody on the right track. Second leg of this stool are the audience advocates. This group has our users' interests at heart and is responsible for all the user testing. It's a cross-departmental group with education leading it. Jackie Armstrong, who may be in here. I hope she's watching this. No, she isn't. But she leads this group. We have a weekly meeting blocked out that we don't always use. I'll talk about that in a second. But what was extremely useful is showing a diagram like this. Well, actually, when the third leg is complete there, to show to everybody that emphasizes how important the user perspective is in a project like this. Next, the curatorial reps. That's kind of the content and institutional group. This group's made up of curators from each of the curatorial departments, as well as members from archives, education, visitor services, and marketing, and a couple other departments. Meet monthly. We go to this group for content recommendations. We say recommendations, we're clear about that. And also to show the evolution of the product from prototyping to releases to design, the whole thing. And a big reason we do this is so that they communicate back to their departments, which you think would be a small ask, but it actually turns out to be a big ask. They also participate in the shaping of the MVP feature set, which for each of these stages, and I'll talk about that in a sec. So it's, of course, where all these groups meet in the middle, where you get that harmonious best website. And I showed this a lot in the educational phases of this project to emphasize that it's where they meet. It's not all organization. And yeah, so I think that went over pretty well. So we are doing this in-house. This is, couldn't find a good in-house slide, so thought that was, yeah. At the outset of this project, we actually did bring in some design and dev mercenaries to help with velocity, but now we're doing it almost, well, totally in-house. So the pros, we have more control over the design, the build, and the product management. You're more likely to build what you can sustain in terms of scope, because you understand the complexities. You're also building in a better way that probably sets you up for a better code base later, better documentation. It's easier to iterate what you build because you know it. And I think kind of on a more spiritual vibe, it's a big part of your life, your website. So it's kind of nice to do it yourself, or nice to have a big hand in your own website. Cons, the cons are basically, I would say, work is 1, 2, 3. There's just so much work involved. It's not, when you outsource something, you do less work, ideally, right? So that's a con. Also, when you have a design firm working for you, like an expensive design firm or an expensive branding firm, there's basically this pile of money that's just burning, like there. It's just, you're just watching it burn. So because that happens, decisions get made much more quickly. That's actually, that is one of the pros of using a design firm. You have people who are, your team is incentivized to make shit happen. So, I think that's important to put into this calculus. So we, of course, jumped on the rebrand bandwagon that everybody is on. And this was, we decided to do this around the same time that we started the redesign project. We didn't want to wait 2 years or whatever, how long it would take to get our new brand because of all the objectives that I mentioned earlier. So we decided to redesign our website with the understanding that we would apply a second coat of paint, of visual design at the end. So right now our prime focus is on UX, but we're a very design focused group. So I'd say, it looks great. It's a pretty very, very nicely designed website as it is, even though it's going to be repainted. Is this the most efficient way to do something? No, of course not. 2 coats of paint suck. But is this a better way, or a more, are you getting a better product in front of your users, and are you getting a better code base in front of your devs and your designers? Yeah, so in this particular situation, it's probably the most efficient way to get to that place. How we work. Sorry, I just really wanted to use this slide. Yeah. So Agile, it's funny, 3 years ago, not a lot of talk about Agile. Now it's everywhere, so that's great. We started using Agile with our app in 2012. Now we do all work that way. If you guys aren't using Agile, you should. We don't do a religious implementation. It's kind of a combination between Kanban and Scrum. It's loose, sustainable. Everybody gets it, because Agile is a whole spectrum of different things. So in terms of what we build, we use Lean. So now it seems like the new Agile is Lean right now. There's so much Lean conversation. So this is the first time we're using Lean for a massive project. We've been using Lean for smaller things, but for a massive cross-departmental project, actually we don't do projects that are that massive all the time. So this is the first time we're enforcing kind of a Lean strategy to the product development. So Lean is a little harder to swallow than Agile. Agile, you have sticky notes and you have stand-up desks and stand-up meetings and terminology that everybody thinks is cool. And that's great, but what happens is you can just end up building the same thing. So with Lean, though, you're trying to launch with smaller feature sets. And that, of course, is not very, like, that's not as sexy to people. Museums are like the ultimate waterfall institutions. You have all these people working on an exhibition, going nuts, you know, working on it 2 years, they turn on the lights and they go to the next exhibition. You know, Lean methodology was a little bit of a tough pill for them to swallow. One thing that was extremely helpful in pushing this idea through, was involving the curatorial reps, the, like, you know, one of the major pillars of this three-legged house. Yeah, a lot of metaphors going on there, sorry. The curatorial reps help define that feature set. So you have this, you know, there's transparency around how decisions are made. It's, you know, the feature set isn't the whim of some person. There's also participation, cross-departmental participation. Yeah, so I think that was really helpful. So I would recommend that if anybody's interested in doing this. Crucial to the success of these exercises, these MVP feature set exercises, is making sure that everybody understands, or enforcing the rule that every feature has a cost associated with it. So, for example, when we would present what we thought the MVP feature set was for any section of the project, and someone thought, well, it needs this, then we would have to figure out what to take out. So that's just the best way of getting everybody to really prioritize. Yeah, all these projects are about prioritizing things. In the educational phase, this is a slide that I showed. I thought it was pretty effective. You know, we would envision like this beautiful little, or this sleek race car. Everybody would get excited about it. All the stakeholders would, you know, their voices would rise in unison, and it would just like, they'd dump features onto it, you know, and then we'd launch something like this, which, you know, resembles a car. It does every possible thing you could ever want it to do, but nobody wants to use it because it's just a mess. So, you know, that's pretty hyperbolic, but I thought it was effective. We're launching in phases, which is pretty big for us. We started with a collection in July of last year, then moved on to the calendar, then ticketing, then the exhibition history. We just launched the homepage and nav. We have audio tours coming up, and then a bunch of static templates. We chose that order mostly due to traffic, or yeah, collection gets most of our traffic, then the calendar, tickets is big. We did the exhibition history. Actually, that was unplanned. We basically had the culmination of 14 years, a 14-year archive project happening, so, or came to fruition. So we actually had structured data and content that we could use, and it was so cool. If you haven't seen our exhibition history, you should. But it was so cool that we decided to push other stuff back and slot that in. Homepage after that, homepage gets a ton of traffic, of course, but we wanted to have more clarity around the brand. So that's why we put that at the end there. Pros, so there are a lot of pros to doing it this way. You're breaking down a massive project into manageable chunks. You know, manageable means still really massive, but it's more manageable than the whole thing. You get improvements out faster, you can learn from each release. Smaller launches are better in general, you're mitigating risk. We always try to deploy often. It allows for change. For example, we were able to slot the exhibition history in there. It also allows you to experiment. So we started experimenting in Go, and now the homepage is in Go, and it was a great experiment that really turned out well, because our homepage is so fast now. So I also recommend Go if anybody is thinking about Go. Yeah. Cons, tons of cons. Yeah, Frankensteinian website, Frankensteinian product. You've got multiple stacks that are on prod to support, so that's stressful. We were supporting multiple CMSs for a while. For a while we were doing 3. I think that was for about a couple months. I think we were doing 2 CMSs for 4 months. That's not fun. Poor cross-site user experience. You know, you're on this beautiful section called the collection, and then you go to the calendar and it looks very different, but that's a short-term thing. It's all about iterating on this. So you have to kind of figure out what your tolerance for that type of experience is. It's also, it's kind of difficult to come up with a systematic design and UX if you're thinking about things in these silos. Of course, you want to think in a systematic way, but you really are focusing on one thing, so it's just something to keep in mind. You want to make sure that your design and UX is really generalizable. User testing, education managed this. We had time blocked out every week, which was super useful. I think that's great because people's calendars get filled up so quickly, so just have something that you can take advantage of anytime. We tested in the galleries, the library, or membership, or different areas depending on the audience that we were that we wanted to study. We'd do it as needed, so sometimes we did it every week when there were lots of prototyping happen. Sometimes we wouldn't test for a month. We were super surgical or broad, depending on what needed to be tested. So that was really useful. Yeah, cool. UX labs, aka design sprints. We did this at the beginning. We did like crazy eights and group crits and group voting. We kind of stopped doing this after about 3 times because it just took so much time. So like to do these well, you need about 4 hours. And when you're talking about a project that lasts 1.5 to 2 years, it's really hard to take 4 hours of people's time on a regular basis when you have all these other meetings planned. So I think they would have worked well for a smaller, more contained project. They were great for cross-departmental spirit and ownership. You get these great slides that you can show at MCN, but it just wasn't very sustainable in the end. So last slide here is accessibility. This is something we decided to do earlier than later, and I totally think everybody should do that. So we brought in NCAM, which is the National Center for Accessible Media. They came in, did a half-day training session, which wasn't so useful. Our devs thought they knew everything. But what was really helpful was actually they audited our releases. So every time we'd release something, they would audit it. And it was basically like a report card with instructions and help on how to address those things. So that was great. Like in the beginning, we got like, not Fs, but maybe C minuses. And so we had quite a bit of work to make it better for accessibility. But we learned a lot in the beginning, and so we just applied those learnings to the rest of the site. So now when we get our report card, it's like a B+, so that's pretty cool. All right, Liz. Good.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks, Shannon, that was good. Just so you know. I also want to point out that Loic is here as well. Loic is very much involved in our website refresh. So at the end, when you have questions, you can ask myself, you can ask Loic as well. He's heading up our department. So I'm at the Met, and I was serving as the project manager for our website refresh. So metmuseum.org, we started it in 1995, so it's 21 years old. We got 33 million visitors to the site last year. It's a very large website, over 500,000 pages. Granted, 400,000 or so of those are the collection. So we have a very large collection, and a lot of it is online. And just to give a sense of the value of our .org, the website is one product in a digital ecosystem. So we have social media program, we have an app, we have an audio guide, but the .org does get a lot of traffic. And when you look at how many people come through the door, you can also kind of look at what our global audience is and measure that by how many people we reach online. And the .org is a part of that. So this is kind of our breakdown in terms of devices. So about 70% are on desktop. Up until this refresh, which launched in March 2015, we had a desktop website primarily, and then we had a smaller mobile site, so similar to MoMA. But we have I think that we see tablet and mobile as being major growth areas that we'd like to target going forward, because we see these as kind of low numbers. When it comes to mobile usage, most people are coming to the site to get basic information about visiting or what's on, and people coming to the desktop or the tablet site are looking for information about art. So this is the before slide. We had, like I said, we had a desktop site and a separate mobile site. We had a lot of navigation, and actually we had all of these landing pages which just duplicated content that was further in the site, which was very confusing. There was just a lot of...
We did too.
You had that too? Yeah, the landing page seemed like a good idea at the time. Yeah, we just had inconsistent branding. Actually, before we rebranded, we really didn't have brand guidelines. So, you know, you could do whatever you wanted with the logo and the text and the lockup. But now we have full guidelines. We have a brand website, actually. It's internal facing. Yeah, so that's kind of the pre-state. And then this is what we ended up with afterwards. We wanted to do something that was really visually driven, since we are an art museum. Also, our brand changed from being the full name, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to just the Met. And so, you know, we had to kind of signify and introduce ourselves and tell people we are an art museum. Some people may know there is another Met in New York, which is an opera house. So we had to kind of make it clear who we are. So yeah, very visually driven. We reduced the number of templates that we have to about 12. We reduced our top-level navigation items and tried to make the nomenclature and the language a lot clearer for the navigation. And we worked very closely with design and marketing on the branding, the implementation of the brand. We were kind of doing a little bit of this concurrently. We didn't have a full set of guidelines or any examples of how the brand would be implemented when we started this project. So we were working with them very closely to make sure that we were kind of moving in the right direction together. And the other thing is really having clear information about a visit on the homepage. So we thought we were doing this pretty well. You come to the page, you see, you know, a huge banner about an exhibition, you know what's going on. But through our user testing, we found that people really didn't know enough about the Met. They didn't know that it was 3 buildings. They didn't know, you know, that it was an art museum. So this was something that we really focused on when we were working on the homepage. We had kind of set out our aspirations in the beginning. I should say that our time frame was very short. So we knew that going in, that we were working with a really aggressive timeline. We knew that it was March 1st. As Shannon said, the website was part of a whole brand launch that was all happening on March 1st, and we were opening a museum, the Breuer building. So there was a lot going on, and we really didn't have the option to kind of stretch the timeline to fit the needs of the project. But still, we had these kind of aspirations here. I'm not going to read through them, but I will say that looking at them in hindsight, you know, there were some things that we did, I think we did keep front and center, and there were other things that we realized, we got to kind of like work with this a little bit more. You know, improve the experience for non-English English speakers. I think once we really dug into that, we realized this is a holistic thing that we have to look at across our entire digital ecosystem. It's not something we're going to just solve with a website refresh, which was meant to be kind of a light touch and implementation of the brand. So we decided not to tackle that for this project. But I mean, I'd say put the user first. I think that we did what we could there, but it's very challenging when you have a crazy short timeline, and you also have a website that's not a uniform experience across the whole thing. We've always conceptualized our website as one big product, but really it is multiple different products with different user groups and business needs, totally different experiences in different areas of the site. So for example, you have a whole transactional side to it. You have a whole blogging platform on there, and you have everything about the visit. So because we were opening a new building and we were implementing the brand, we decided to really focus on the visit side of things, and so we really improved the experience of finding out everything you need for a visit. But I would say that when it comes to, say, the blogging platform, we weren't improving things for users. So that's one thing that I think, just to be transparent, that's something that we now realize, okay, let's go back and figure out how to make this better. So our approach, I would call this, have you guys heard the term waggle or waggle? It's like waterfall agile. I feel like it's actually just like the current way to say waterfall, because like waterfall used to be really horrible, like way, like the worst thing you could do. And then people realized that, and then agile became very trendy, but it's also very hard to change. And when you have a hard deadline, it's very difficult to do agile, because having a hard deadline and a set of deliverables kind of assigned, that's sort of antithetical to what agile really is. So I think we did some things in a waterfall fashion and some things agile. We did have a discovery phase and then a design phase and then a development phase. And that meant that there were definitely like sacrifices that we'd have to make. But we did have iterations, and we would choose for each iteration what was the top priority. We definitely cut things that we thought, we just couldn't do justice. So those kinds of things were a little bit more agile influenced. So discovery, we did a user research session in-house. We did card sorting with visitors to try to, I think that was really focused on navigation. In the beginning, we really wanted to understand our sitemap. So we just did card sorting with visitors to see what kind of word associations they had between top-level navigation and things that they thought should be kind of grouped together. So that was really insightful and informed how we approached the navigation. In Discovery, we also hired firms to help us with the design and the development. And we worked with them to basically audit the site. So what are the requirements for each section? Who are the users for each section? What's effective? What's redundant? What doesn't need to be there? And we worked with a firm, Fantasy Interactive, who have done many, many brand implementations and refreshes of websites. So very large websites like USA Today. So they had done this many times before, and they came to us with their complete audit of the site and their proposal for what the templates should look like based on our needs. So we pretty much stuck to that. And then also, in order to mitigate challenges that might come up in development, we had a solutions architect from the development side. Our partner was this company, Filardi. We had a solutions architect come and join us in the design phase to validate the types of decisions that we were making, and also start to create sort of the workflow for how we would start to implement it in development. And then we had a second kind of moment of user research, I'll say, where we actually worked with a firm who recruited a panel of testers for us, where we tested sort of our kind of design scheme. And that's where we found out that we really needed to focus a lot more on the homepage on the visit. And so we made a lot of changes based on that session. And then once we get towards the end here, it just became complete crunch time. Like, what can we do? What's highest impact? How do we just make sure that we launch on time, pretty much? This is the full team of people who worked on this project. And I put this up here just because I think it's possible. Yeah. Shannon encouraged me to put this up here because he had, like, he's got his very lean team. But, I think it's important to look at that. We have a very large team, and we found out that we had to do this, and we had to work with what we had, but also we found out that we had a little bit of budget too. So we had to do what we could to basically make sure that we were meeting the expectations. So we did work with a design firm, and we worked with a development firm. The development firm was embedded within our team, so we had to come to a shared set of practices and workflow that we wanted to use. A big part of the success of the project was stakeholder management. So we had a monthly meeting with representatives from departments all over the museum. And we also had a bi-weekly meeting with the executive team and also the brand team. And basically, we would use this as an opportunity to share everything we could with our stakeholders. Anything that we thought would raise an eyebrow or make someone, shoot back a lot of questions or concerns, we would bring it up in this meeting because we kind of told them this is your opportunity. So I think that was pretty successful. And then also use this as an opportunity to socialize the MVP concept, which I'm going to come back to. So the role of branding, I kind of already covered this. I don't want to talk for too much longer because I want to leave time for Sofie, but basically because the branding had implications on nearly everything that we did across the museum, everyone was kind of working towards the same goal of understanding what the brand is and trying to express it in the best way they could. And so I think that it meant that we were all kind of working on this together, and we weren't getting so much scrutiny over what we were doing on the site because education was rebranding all of their programs, and this was happening in all of the departments. Also, we did a big audience engagement study before we did the brand, and the brand was based on that. So the premise for change was basically this concept that the Met is not welcoming. And so we had to kind of all think about that, what would make us more welcoming to people. So I think that was something that really resonated with people and helped us to kind of unite around that purpose. And then just the logistical coordination of not having the full brand guidelines, not really having the fonts or the colors nailed down until the end. It just meant that we had to be in really close contact with the brand team. Role of MVP concept, I'm not really going to read this slide to you, but basically this is our way of managing scope. I wouldn't say that, at an art museum that we're super agile like a startup. This is one of the most interesting conversations I've had with Shannon and Sofie as we're preparing for this. This concept MVP, it's like startup world lingo for we're going to start fresh with a super lean product, get it out there, test it, and make improvements just based on what people say and how they use it. But we're in the business of institutional websites that already have a life. Our site's 20 years old. And they're already representing certain aspects of the museum, and they're already interacting with people who have certain experiences with the site already. So basically, the point that we're trying to make to our stakeholders is we can't do everything. We're not going to keep everything. We're going to scrutinize everything. But we have to manage what we can actually achieve, and that's just a very straightforward way of doing that. So that's all. Thanks.
My name is Sofie Andersen. I'm the Director of Digital Media at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. I have been at the museum for 6 months, so I'm a bit of an MVP myself. So there's a little bit of a caveat, but also by way of explanation, I come from producing multimedia apps and interpretive content for museums around the world for about 20 years. So although I'm an MVP at the Whitney, part of what I'm going to be talking about is how what we really are doing in this digital field is a constant kind of work in progress, and I'm not talking about sort of recent launches as my colleagues have been doing, but really about taking us back to when we rebranded at the Whitney in 2013 and how that set us up for moving to our new home in 2015 and the digital legacy that we are now working with and thinking about our future in our new home. So I'll start by just a quick recap. We were founded in 1907, but we opened our doors as a museum in 1931. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney was our founder, and she really established the mission of the museum as an artist museum. We were based downtown. So in some ways, our move downtown is a return to where we started, and I think it's really apt for talking about our digital environment because we started with thinking about, before our move, what did it really mean to move, and did people really understand who we were? And the answer was kind of. So on the right, you see our old logo, but the logo was really the only kind of consistent part of our identity. It was expressed in many, many different ways and materials across our different landscapes, both digital and across the museum. And on the left, you see sort of an embraced part of our new brand that was created to help create a consistent message about who we are and start telling people about the fact that we were going to be moving downtown and create a really strong identity. The identity was really organic and authentic to who we are, and there were kind of 4 tenets that came out of that brand exercise: never being fixed, being set apart, always fresh and on our own terms. And I think never fixed especially is something that I think we at the museum really kind of come back to on a constant basis. We're an incredibly nimble institution. We're constantly changing out our exhibitions and even our collection displays. And, you know, I think that we often kind of refer back to this Goethe quote about a museum never being finished but boundless and ever in motion. And so part of our new identity was really this responsive W that was created, which could be used in many, many different manifestations and could be manipulated across different environments. So you see that on the bottom left. At the same time as rebranding, there was kind of an aha moment also in our industry, and our digital media team was formed. What you see here is our current digital media team, and we had which is already quite scrappy in comparison to my colleagues here, but probably not unfamiliar to others here. But when we started when we did the rebrand, we also rebranded our website, and we needed to have an in-house team to deal with that rebrand and actually to centralize the digital activities in-house. So before that, there are various versions of kind of wiki-like activities, and really all the processes of creating content and distributing content became centralized in the digital media team at that time, and we are under the marketing and communications division within the museum. And we're really evenly split between content and technology, but part of what we're looking at now is when we were set up, we were very functional. We had to do a job, we had to get us to launch, and now I think that, for reasons I'll get into more in a minute, I think we can really start thinking about ourselves as a user experience team, which then, what I haven't added, is all of the stakeholders that then are also part of the user experience team. So we work very closely with the stakeholders throughout the museum, and there are particular stakeholders that have a lot to say in terms of our visitor experience team and our graphic design and education and curatorial, of course. So this is just kind of a quick show and tell. So this is the website before we rebranded. And this is the website that you see today. So it has migrated and sort of integrated a lot of systems along the way, but essentially the structure is more or less the same. Some major milestones getting us from when we rebranded to where we are today are up here. So we rebranded, and at the same time, again, I talked about a centralized team. Well, we created a staff site to help us organize that work internally, and I think it's one of the great successes of having an in-house team is that we could help not just develop a product, but really help ourselves as an institution to manage that product. So that's where internal folks can go to, set up a work order for a piece of work that needs to get done, and we can all in our different teams manage it. And this isn't, by the way, just for the digital media team. This also works for many other departments within the museum. And then we have this period in grey, which is the period that we went dark. So unlike SF MoMA, who we're very jealous of, we only went dark for 6 months between moving from uptown to downtown. So we were essentially moving until we left and opened 6 months later. And one of the pieces that we put in place in order to help communicate about the move, in addition to the brand, was the Whitney Stories series. So a video series really looking at the people who make up the Whitney and the kind of work that we do there. We also launched our online collection with our colleagues at COGAP, a really, really big project. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, as well as a ticketing, an online admissions system and membership, which got us ready for our launch. So our online collection was a really important part of our strategy. You know, there was a real concern that with going dark, people wouldn't have a physical place to come and experience the collection. So we went from having an online collection of 900 works to 22,000. I think it launched with 21,000, and we're up to almost 23 now. And really, that was an incredible feat to be doing at the same time as launching a museum. So we got the whole collection online with images for most things. There are still sort of patches, audio, contextual texts, a great wealth of information, and I think a very successful project to launch while we went dark, but most importantly for when we reopened, so people could really understand, what is this place, the Whitney, that was getting so much attention. And we sort of, as an interesting byproduct of that, have seen a great increase in our loan requests since our collection went online, which I think is just one of those, it wasn't an intended outcome, but sort of interesting. I think one of the challenges with the project, as I have started to inherit the work, is really that it was very fast-tracked. It was a hugely complex engine that we built, and a lot of stakeholders involved, and a lot of promises made about what the potential for the online collection could be, when in reality what launched was an incredible MVP. But there was, I think, a disconnect between what was how it was created together with stakeholders and what was eventually launched, which is actually really tremendous. And which we can build on. Also, as part of our digital ecosystem, we expanded, as I mentioned before, with ticketing and membership, but also with digital signage. And I think that's had a really important shift for us. We went from being an internal functional team to having a very public face. The digital signage meant that we were very visible, and when we were teamed up with the revenue teams, we also had sort of a bigger function than kind of just being the website. I think that is very important for us going forward. But essentially, we launched with a legacy site. We had layered all of these things on top. But when we launched, and my amazing colleague Sarah was talking about this slide earlier today as part of the social media effort, we launched in phases, not by design, but kind of in this waterfall way, because it sort of had to happen in that way. There were other objectives and priorities, but it wasn't by design, and I think it was an incredibly fraught process, again, bringing everybody internally along. There were challenges with the brand, and I think that our incredible in-house graphic design team were working with this brand that was created by Experimental Jet Set, who are, incredible kind of philosophical and beautiful design firm. We have this amazing manual that's, that outlines everything about kind of what it means, but it's a very flat design, and I think that many within the institution really felt challenged by kind of some of the constraints, and I think that we now have this opportunity to really kind of push against it in a more productive way. So the slide shows this slab from our lobby with it, which is actually a piece by Maurizio Catalan that says it seems impossible until it's done, and it's a quote from Nelson Mandela. And I think that there is that sense too that you're kind of all striving towards the launch, and the challenge is after the launch there's huge fatigue and burnout in the team. So this is sort of where I'm stepping in and looking ahead and saying, well, we really have some digital kind of maintenance and legacy issues to address. So when I started, it was already established as a priority in terms of redoing our CMS. So we're rebuilding in-house our CMS right now, also going from 2 to 4 on Rails, and doing it in-house with a little bit of freelance help. But as you could have seen from my earlier slide, we're a really small, scrappy team. So it's a huge endeavor that's taking up a lot of resources. But we're doing it actually now in phases by design, in the sense that we're not doing a massive redesign on the website. We're only lightly retouching the design so that we can get the technical part in place, and then really work with our stakeholders to have the conversations that you guys have all been having to get to where you are, and really build up trust and to understand our content and be able to kind of really look forward with much more technical prowess. And to that end, I think part of that is really thinking about a user-centric approach. This is very new language within the museum. As I said before, digital has become more significant, but our audiences aren't very well known. We know a lot about what our on-site audiences do, but we don't understand our digital audiences terribly well. And even knitting them together as one audience, so the audio guide multimedia experience has recently come back in under digital media. And I think, again, understanding that this is all part of an ecosystem is really important, and looking at visitor research. Expanding our universal welcome. So it's really part of our mission to be an artist museum, but also to be an inclusive environment. We've taken accessibility very seriously for a very long time, but it's also time to refresh our tools. As part of our CMS, we have a great opportunity. We're really looking at our integration with screen readers and making sure that we are up to industry standards. We've also been working with NCAM in that respect. But I think going further than that and really thinking about our content, so we create a lot of access content, but really thinking about this moment that we have, and Michelle Obama was at the inauguration of the museum in 2015, and she put it so well: we must continually strive for the Whitney to be a place for all Americans to see themselves. So it's a place of American art, but it's also a place of American people, and specifically at the museum and online. And when I heard her speak about that coming into this position, it really was significant to me that that's an important objective for us. And shifting from focusing on internal voices to bringing in external voices. On a nuts and bolts level, we're also improving our mobile with our new CMS. So our responsive site is going to have a much better interface for mobile. And we're also looking at how to take advantage of the free Wi-Fi we have in the building and really drive people to the mobile site when they come. So that will be, we'll be looking at that. And we're also really looking at the editorial side of what we do. I mentioned that's where I'm coming in as my background, and it's really important for us to be a place where brave stories are told, and told in a nimble way. So Whitney Stories was this incredible video program that was created for the launch, but once the launch was over, it sort of stagnated and became a text-only project, and it really felt like, for me, an opportunity to pick up and think about what are the kind of stories we really want to tell in our institution. And so we're making more personal content through that series. We're bringing in artists' voices. We're linking up with social media campaigns in a much more meaningful way, so that our collection artists are talking about our collection and talking about it in a personal way, making their own connections across the collection. And I think that that's also our opportunity with our online collection, is to really start making some of those connections across the collection. With contemporary artists, so many people not only are influenced by each other, but also know each other, are working in the same community, and that's something I think we can do in a very efficient and resource-aware way. We're also playing around with some of the new ways in which we might want to present video. We're looking at 360, we're experimenting with live streaming, and all of those things which really feel like we're also thinking about how to bring people into the museum and seeding our content in more interesting ways. So some quick takeaways, because I also want to get to the discussion part of this. We really, I think, did a good job embracing our brand, and we can continue to embrace it, and we can do that by pushing back against it and also letting it kind of breathe and expand across our different ecosystems. We did a phased rollout, not by design, but we've learned a lot by doing it, and I think that we can really kind of do it in a much more meaningful way together with our stakeholders. We want to continue focusing on the universal welcome and finding different ways to do that, and bring the content along with our digital. And I think we wanted to make sure this was a discussion, so we had kind of a beginner question, but I think we can also probably, I think, Shannon, take questions. But
yeah, since there's only 5 minutes left, maybe we don't need the seed question. I think the one thing we should take away from this is Waggle, though. Waggle. No.
Make sure it's up there.
So any questions?
Did any of you use analytics to look at the old site to inform anything in the new? What areas don't we went to anymore?
Yeah, you got to do that. Yeah.
We're doing it. We're doing it as
Hardcore.
We go.
Yeah. You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're killing them as we speak.
Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we have one game going at the moment, which is sort of finding the deepest, darkest corners of the website with the worst pictures, and showing them around to people as a reminder that there's a lot there that people have just even forgotten about. I certainly felt, and I've heard loudly since I arrived, that over time with these sort of digital migrations that some parts of the site have been left behind and sort of orphaned, and a really strong kind of internal voice, don't orphan this part of the site. But, there are parts of our site that are hundreds of pages of long with individual pages with single photos on them that are not meaningful. So we're looking at that and talking very constructively with our stakeholders about that.
Where's the control of the images that you're using on the website coming from? I mean, you said you're using thousands of images on the website. Who's making the decisions in terms of what images get used on the website, which ones do not? Is that something that's centralized with you, or is that graphic design, or?
I guess it depends on the section you're talking about. If we're talking... Okay. Oh, yeah. Who controls the image selection on the website? It depends on the section, the collection. I'm sure, your 400,000 pages. It's with us, curators decide if something's ready or not. And so it's a little more programmatic for the more marketing types of images. That's a much, much, much smaller subset, by the way. So, that's more back and forth with stakeholders.
I'll just add that was part of our brand guidelines. Our brand guidelines touched upon the logo and lockup, the colors, the type, the photography, the voice and tone. So they actually provided a pool of photography that could be used, and they took new photography. They provided a list of photographers that you could work with, and guidelines for what kinds of photos would look good in different scenarios. And then in terms of the collection, there's a whole separate workflow for digitizing the collection in those images.
And I'll just speak to also, we have very specific guidelines about how to treat images. It's one of the kind of bigger constraints about our brand. We are not allowed to crop any of our art images. They have to be, displayed in full. And so for that, it's very, very specific. But for the deep, dark parts of the site with the funny pictures, it's really about, working together with our, marketing colleagues and looking at what best represents a particular section, and then working with the stakeholders to improve the quality of the photography. And often that's us, making a recommendation and working together on that.
Where do you see the role of native apps in relation to your sites and the responsive side?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, I talk about this with Loic a lot, actually, but the question is, what can a native app do that a mobile website can't? So I think that's the biggest thing. You got a camera, you got location, you have accelerometers. I'm not saying you should use all those things, but those are the things that differentiate it. So, those are the kinds of, that goes into the calculus. Okay.
Well, we work together, so I can answer this question later. But I guess for everyone else's benefit, when we made the app, we wanted to create a quick dashboard for people to get information about how to get around the Met and just what they wanted to do and see at the Met, in a way that was sort of a comment on some things they weren't getting from the mobile website. So when we launched our website, which we focused on informing people about those things on the website, we answered a lot of the same questions. So now it's like the app is, it's got to completely change directions because it's no longer fulfilling that need. Also, when we launched the app, we realized that people really wanted to use the app for as an on-site utility to connect with the museum and the collection. So that's something that I think we have to figure out. Does that go on the web, or does that go in an app? That's kind of the next stage for us.
And for us, I skipped over this stat, but as part of looking at how we're going to move forward, we've been looking at some of the data about how people use our, different parts of the site. And mobile is 50% of our traffic, which I think among my colleagues here is probably the highest percent. So it's really significant to us to look at how to optimize that experience. And we actually put all of our content, really very, very little on line. All of our audio guide content goes on there, all of our videos, everything. So there's a real opportunity to drive people to that, particularly on site. We also have all of our events on there, which we do, tremendous amount of performances and film programs and all that kind of stuff. So there's really an opportunity, I think, in that, and that's part of what we're looking to evaluate now is, once we can really improve our responsive site, what really would we be doing in an app that we wouldn't be doing on the site? And, and I think there are some things that are interesting. I'm looking at location-aware experiences and all of these kinds of things, and I think that the field is narrowing, and especially because we have the Wi-Fi already. So, yeah, I'm looking at it.
Last question? Back.
I know this is a question on I'm always asked this question. Can you tell us the budget to the
Well, we did almost all of it in-house, so, our budget was the amount of time we dedicated to the blood, sweat, and tears, basically, that went into it.
Loic?
Northern part, it was, so I'll say I'm over range, right? So over about 500,000 per million. It's a nice range. We're in that window.
Okay, so he said 500,000 to $1 million.
We're still in the latest refresh, so I can't really speak to the earlier budgets, and I think that there's so many components of it, but we're doing all of our development in-house with a little bit of freelance budget and all of our own graphic design team. So I would say that we're like under 100 for what we're working on right now, with some software upgrades and server upgrades as well.
So remember Wagil, and I think it's cocktail time, right?
Cocktails!